Week 2 of Disney Lorcana Azurite C metagame is in the books. And there were some big tournaments this weekend. There were multiple 100-plus player tournaments. There were a couple more within the 40 to 80 person range. There was a lot of Disney Lorcana to really break down this week, and a lot of, honestly, analysis to take a real good insight of what the metagames might be shaping up to be. And in this one, a bit of a comparison too, to really understand the difference between metagames in EU and NA, and really just trying to figure out, hey, what are the best decks for me to play in the LCQ in Paris? What are the best decks to kind of like just assume what I could even see in Paris and things like that? So let's get right into it today, and let's see what the meta breakdown looks like for week 2. The week 2 meta report showcasing that Amber Steel is back in business. And this is not too shocking, in all honesty, when we kind of look at some of the Amber Steel decks and then some of the Ruby Sapphire decks and really start breaking them down. You're going to see why there's an uptick of Amber Steel seeing success again. But, 17 of them in top cuts. Ruby Sapphire had 14, Amethyst Emerald at 13, Amethyst Steel at 9, Amethyst Ruby at 8, Emerald Steel at 5, and then Sapphire Steel and Sapphire Amethyst picking up ones. No top cuts for Sapphire Steel or Sapphire Amethyst, but there were reported in top 16s and even top 32s. And I definitely want to look at each of those lists to kind of showcase some of the newer cards that are being brought up into those types of decks for this particular report to understand, like, hey, these are up and coming decks that you might see showcased moving forward. All in all, I think that this is a big difference from last week, where Amethyst Steel was one of the more prevalent decks in the metagame. Amethyst Ruby a little bit further down than I assumed it would be, and Ruby Sapphire taking a huge spike back up, where Amber Steel and Ruby Sapphire are now kind of like leaning in week 2 as kind of a response to like what Amethyst Emerald were doing and maybe what Amethyst Steel were doing. Both of those decks might struggle a bit with Amber Steel and Ruby Sapphire. Although it was backup, it could have been really almost solely based on the Amber Steel matchups. However, I do think what's very interesting is if you really look at the differences in some of these events. For the Lore, you can see here's the top 16 decks that are being represented, where you have 6 Ruby Sapphire, 4 Amber Steels, 4 Emerald Amethyst, 1 Ruby Amethyst, and 1 Sapphire Amethyst. You can see there are no Emerald Steel decks to be found. There's no Amethyst Steel to be found. But over here in the top 32, in this particular one, we had 10 Amber Steels. That is significantly more. Obviously, it's top 32, so we're seeing a little bit more numbers, but still, you have 6 Ruby Amethyst also to the 1 Ruby Amethyst. You have 5 Amethyst Steel to 0. You have 2 Emerald Steel to 0. And even the Emerald Amethyst, although it's double the player base, it's still kind of the same in numbers. The same can be said about Ruby Sapphire. I want to take a brief look at the difference in the top 8s, though. So while these are showcasing top 16s and top 32s, respectively, the top cuts were even more interesting. So in the Battle of the Bay, there were 2 Amethyst Ruby, 2 Amber Steel, 2 Amethyst Steel, 1 Emerald Steel, and 1 Emerald Amethyst, while For the Lore had 3 Ruby Sapphires, 2 Amber Steels, 1, 2, 3 Emerald Amethyst. So you're talking about a very different looking metagame. 3 Emerald Amethyst, 3 Ruby Sapphire, 2 Steel Songs, all of a sudden to a little bit more diversity over in the North American Battle of the Bay side that included Emerald Steel and Amethyst Steel. So there really is like a pretty clear difference here of metagames. And I think that that's really important to note. There are North American players flying all the way to Paris to play in LCQs to try and qualify for this, EU Continentals, which is great. But the real interesting take here is that depending on where you're playing and in like what side of the world you're playing in, you might very well be playing in different metagames. Amethyst Steel was nowhere to be found on the other side of the pond. Emerald Steel, very down, like not being played, not seeing success. Ruby Sapphire seems to be kind of in the middle, but, in America, there was 0. There was 0 in the top 8. And for, this For the Lore, there were 3 of them. So I think it's very interesting at the way the metagames are shaping up and really looking different kind of based on your location. I think that's really cool. I think it's really interesting. And it's definitely something that we're going to develop and really kind of focus on moving forward, because right now, biggest tournament to come is Paris. So Paris is going to be huge. EU Continentals is going to really set the tone for the kind of the rest of the Azurite C metagame. But, you have CCS the week after, you have the NA Continentals a few weeks after that, and then we're going to get into set championships. So right now, when you look at this, you're preparing for EU Continentals, it's really hard not to kind of be like lean a little bit towards what is being played over there. North Americans, I'm sure, we're going to have some numbers that go over there to participate, but it's not going to be a large number. So it's just one of those like, hey, even though you're going to see these reports for over in EU Continentals, if you're playing in North America tournaments, we're not seeing the same thing at all. It's not like we're seeing like, oh, we're only seeing these decks. Like, no, we're actually seeing entirely different decks be successful in entirely different metagames. So just a lot to note there when you're planning for a tournament that's upcoming for you. So let's take a look at the top 4 winning list by Rafi Game here. This was a 140 player tournament, and this list was able to take home a top 4 finish. Now, this is another deck that I think as we move on through the metagame, there are going to be different decisions being made and different successes. Last week, we saw decks that had no shift lines. They were just like, nope, we're not doing it. We're not playing the Robins. We're not playing Queens. We're not playing Cinderellas. Like, we're not doing any of those things. And it saw success, and it was, in top 4s of tournaments. Now we're seeing the opposite again. 140 player tournament. We got the Robins back in. We got the Cinderellas back in. We even brought back World's Greatest Criminal Mind, which is a very interesting thing for this metagame because, hey, Pluto's a card. It's a card that we have to get through and get around. And, paying for or singing for a steel song like Along Came Zeus is nice, and it is a way to remove Pluto. But if my Cinderella can exert and just World's Greatest Criminal Mind Pluto, that's also a move that we can kind of respect and understand that, hey, maybe this is that final, that like extra card. I think so often than not, when you really look at Steel Songs players, we're consistently seeing the same, 14 to 16 songs. How many Zeus are we playing? Are we playing 4? I don't know. Are we playing A Whole New World? Yes or no? Probably. So when you go 4 Storm Rage on, 4 Zeus, 4 Strength of Raging Fire, 4 Along Came, or 4 A Whole New World, then you start going, okay, what are my last songs? Am I going to play 4 more songs to get to 20, make my aerial better, or am I just going to like add a splash? Very often we see Bare Necessities in this spot. We've seen I'm Still Here kind of like showcasing that spot. I can't remember the name of the song one right now of the 2-cost one that gets a guy back, but we've seen that a little bit coming up. I'll put it on screen. And then now we're seeing World's Greatest Criminal Mind because Pluto is it's a card that people are playing in high numbers. If I can just exert my Cinderella to remove Pluto, I'm going to feel pretty okay about that. So you might now see World's Greatest Criminal Mind kind of come back into the action. I think this is a really good list. I think it's showcasing again, like, hey, we know that the way the play draw works, Ursula is so important on the draw games. I got to play my Ursulas. Piglet is a great character, and it's going to gain me 3 lore when it does, but it's not a card that I want to see in high numbers, and I really like the design of this. I also like the respect of saying, hey, there's a lot more steel decks in the format. Because there's a lot more steel decks in the format, I'm going to play Cinderella Stouthearted, because what are they going to do to it? How do they answer that? How does Amethyst Steel deal with with the Cinderella? Like, it's just not a good position for them. So I really like the nod going back to Cinderellas in this list as well. Very well designed. Really nice to see all the differences, once again, of how Amber Steel can be successful within a given metagame. Now let's talk about Ruby Sapphire and its position in the metagame. We've seen an uptick of Amber Steel being successful, but why is that? And I think if you take a look at this list, you're going to really firmly understand that a lot of Ruby Sapphire players are taking Fishbone Quill out of their deck. Fishbone Quill is the best card against Amber Steel decks. So if Fishbone Quill is not the card that you're going to have to kind of utilize all of that extra card advantage that you get from A Whole New World when your opponent plays against you, you are much worse into those matchups. So this is a sacrifice that's being made, that you're saying, okay, I no longer want Fishbone Quill, and because of that, I can make room for cards like the Queen. I can play more Sisus, like I can make these rooms for a Pirate's Life and things like that. But the moment you do that, the moment you try and get greedy off of your Amber Steel matchup, well, you get punished. And now you have Amber Steel decks finding ways to beat Ruby Sapphire. I think that's a big deal. And I think that if you're really kind of going into a tournament, especially in the 2-game format, where you go, hey, my best matchup is Amber Steel, but all of a sudden you don't have Fishbone Quill in your list, and now you're dropping games to Amber Steel, that's the first place I would look. I go, man, can I really afford not to play Fishbone Quill? And if I'm being honest, like, I'm not a Fishbone Quill enthusiast. I do think that it's one of the worst cards in the deck on average in most of your matchups. When you talk about cards that are like in your hand at the end of the game, Fishbone Quill is one of those cards that you feel like, man, I wish I didn't have this many copies of this card. I wish I didn't need this many copies of this card. But when you go, if I'm losing to Emerald Amethyst, if I'm losing to Amber Steel, and you start looking at things like, man, why am I losing these matchups? How do I pivot? The answer is you might not be able to beat everything, but you have to secure up your matchups that you know that you can win. And Amber Steel is a matchup that I feel like on average, this deck should 2-0. Amethyst Steel should 2-0. Sapphire Steel should 2-0. So if all of a sudden these wheel decks that are coming up, you're like no longer 2-0ing them, you're no longer winning on the draw, I think the first place I would look would be Fishbone Quill. But hey, still a top 8 player in an 88 player tournament. But I just think that that's one of the reasons why all of a sudden we're seeing Amber Steel see success is because of deck lists like this that are just cheating on their Amber Steel matchups. Whether or not that was true for this particular player, we don't know. But what I can tell for sure is that that's what I think you're seeing this uptick of Amber Steel is because all of a sudden these decks are cheating on Ursula's. These decks are cheating on Fishbone Quills. And I think that's why a whole new world is starting to look a lot better in the current metagame. And we'll see how the game kind of reacts to that. Talking about 60 card characters without Mufasa, look no further than Emerald Amethyst. Very, very similar to the list we covered last week by Artifacts. This is a deck that I think is going to keep tinkering with numbers. But again, what I love about this list right now is we're setting ourselves up in a position that we are not going to lose to Diablo decks. 4 Go-Go, 4 Kid Cloud Kicker, 4 Genie Wish Fulfilled, and 4 Elsa. I think that that is the generic lock currently for this list in any world where we assume Diablo decks will exist. I think that's exactly how we have to build these. Now, we have, one Peter Pan. I guess that's fine. I don't really love that card, but I understand the necessity of it. We have 1 Gazelle. I would argue that Gazelle is better than Peter Pan. I like the idea that all of a sudden my crabs and my bonsai and, like my white roses can all of a sudden trade up into a Diablo that's hiding in the cove. I actually really like that. I like even the idea of being able to give my bonsai evasive in general to make it live a little bit longer and kind of survive and have a little more sturdability to it. So I think a card like Gazelle might be a card that might get played more. And I really do specifically like it over the Peter Pan, even though the rush mechanic and all those things. I just think that Gazelle might have a better purpose as an inkable character in your deck. But the rest of this list is great. It's really just like very much playing into the Emerald Amethyst play style. The one card I'm still confused about, just as a player from the outside looking in, is saying, do I still really need rabbits in a deck that I'm not even playing snakes anymore? I think that that's the one card for me that I would maybe even be looking to go lower to the ground and just play a card like Cusco. Having, Diablo into Cusco later on in the game, into Be Prepared and into Sisus and things like that. I really like Cusco still a bunch. I do understand where Rabbit is and the position of it, but as an uninkable, again, I wonder if I can make my deck just a little bit better without that uninkable count. Aside from that, I think that this deck is very straightforward. I really just look at the uninkable counts, cards that I'm definitely not in love with in this strategy right now, and I wonder if I can make them better. And that's why Peter Pan, I've never been a fan of Peter Pan at all. I understood why it was played and the respect it needed, but I don't think that this particular list needs that. And I do wonder if a card like Gazelle can represent it a little bit more. Rabbit is the one I think is the most up for grabs. Rabbit's obviously a very good card. There's no doubt about it. But can I do anything else with that position, with that spot? Can a card like Lyle be, good in that spot and give us a little bit more in the mirror match and things like that? I just think that those are if we're really looking for ways to hedge our bets, those are the cards I would be looking at. If you're really looking for even more analysis, right now we're coming up on the 3rd week of reports. We're going to be leading into the biggest events of the year where we have, or the end of the year, I should say, where we have the Paris EU coming up. We have CCS 8K coming up. So 2 very large events coming up for different sides of the world. This is going to be the kind of the go home period. We're going to be starting to really develop this metagame and really showcasing, hey, these are the things that we believe that are going to happen. We're going to give our real brunt analysis of it. I love doing the meta report, but I can't cover every single deck list. If you're going to have here and you want to see even more information, On the Climb is the best way to do it. If you want to support us even a little bit more, get a lot more content, a lot more written content, definitely check out the Metafy Forest. Thank you guys so much that have already supported us. It really does mean a lot to us. Let's get to the rest of the decks. Amethyst Steel again, bringing out another brand new version of this deck. And really what it's teaching me and really should be teaching you is that anyone that's been following along with Amethyst Steel is that I think without a shadow of a doubt, there is no like secure Amethyst Steel deck at all right now. Every one of them is successful. Doc Aggro is successful. Tinkerbell, Floodborn, Blue Fairy is successful. This version of this deck is successful. Like every one of these lists are showcasing that Amethyst Steel as a whole is coming together and finding different ways and different tools to the path of success. So let's break this one down a little bit more so everyone understands here. In this list, we now don't see a Blue Fairy, but we still have cards like Robin Hood and Tinkerbell as our shift lines. We're back on rabbits. We now have castles. We are trying out cards like Twinfire, which I'm very curious. The one thing I would ask Daniel for the top 4 here is how he feels about Twinfire after playing in that tournament. I have not been sold on the card. I think that I would just play the 4th Fire the Cannons, or I would just play a Baboom and probably feel better about it. That's been my personal experience. The idea though here is, we're still on snakes. We're still on crabs. We still have the genies and the rabbits. So there's a lot going on here and a lot of decisions being made. I also really want to point out that this deck is playing for Zeus. My biggest problem in general with Amethyst Steel and Zeus is not having characters that effectively sing it. I'm not a big fan of ever exerting 2 lore characters to sing songs unless it's absolutely required. So because of that, I'm not a big fan of Zeus because I'd much rather be just gaining lore with Genie than ever exerting him to sing a song. I'd much rather be exerting Tinkerbell to just quest a way to gain 2 lore than sing friends on the other side. So that's why I'm always like eerie about how those like play out. But this list playing 4 goat, playing 2 rabbits are, I'm way more inclined to sing with a goat or sing with a rabbit to make Zeus a little bit better. So if those are the characters that we're playing, then I think I can understand a little bit more. And Zeus also very often, if this is like not a joke at all, this list is also comfortable to saying like, I'm just going to pay 4 to play Zeus. Like if I just have an opening of, efficient 1 cost, efficient 2 cost, efficient 3 cost, and all I need to do is clear the board, my turn 4 can be ink Zeus your guy and then just keep questing. Like that's also completely fine. So there's another way to look at it. But all in all, I just want to point out that like, yes, Amethyst Steel has been successful. Wasn't the most dominant deck this week in terms of like overall metagame analysis, but there were still 2 of them in top 4 of the Battle of the Bay. That's a 140 player tournament that had 2 different versions of Amethyst Steel be successful. So it's definitely a deck that I would keep monitoring, but the real truth is that, if your opponent sits down across from you and goes turn 1, ink a Pete, play a Diablo, that line still might mean that they're playing 3 different decks. And that I think that's a bit scary. So if you're really walking in and you're trying to gain information, Amethyst Steel might be one of the hardest decks ever to get a real read on early on in the game. And it might be before you know it, all of a sudden, there is Robin Hoods and Tinkerbells instead of just being like a Doc Aggro deck or something like that. Or, there might even be a world where your opponent might have 10 locations in their deck and they're a John Silver deck. There's a lot going on right now with Amethyst Steel, which I think is very interesting for the metagame in general. So last week I covered Amethyst Ruby, and I got to leave it up to Ed here. Ed's one of the best in the game. He's a DLC champion, and it makes no shock to me whatsoever that he went out and he won this tournament because that's just how good Ed is. And he did it all the while bringing back Dragonfire. I mean, that's a chapter 1 card. That's a 5 cost uninkable. Doesn't matter. it just doesn't matter, guys. I said last week that I feel like Amethyst Ruby probably needs to take a change of pace and maybe a change of course to really support cards like Maui Shark. And, maybe it's not fully true. Ed figured out like a way to just say, hey, I'm going to play 2 Lady Tremaines, 2 Mana Medusa, 2 Dragonfire, 2 Be Prepared, 2 Sisu. Like every single version of removal is a 2 of in this deck. And it's fine. Like he's just like, hey, I'm just gonna draw the cards I want to draw them. I don't care that they're all uninkable. I don't need to make a choice now. I'll make a better, more informed choice later on in the metagame. Right now, I'll just give myself options. I'll draw my cards with Rabbit. I'll draw my cards with friends on the other side, and I'll live my best life. And that's exactly what's going on here. No castles, right? No libraries, no locations whatsoever, which does open up the room. But this is just showcasing, like, hey, Ruby does have all of these different types of removal. And this is just showcasing at its best form that, you know what, we do have the choice, we do have the option, and this is my option. My option is just play 2 of all my Ruby cards in the deck, except for Brawl, because we need 4 of those. We're back on 4 Flynn Rider, which I think is interesting in the current metagame. And we're back on 4 Dragon Sisu at 3 cost. So because of that, we have this room to be flexible with the rest of our Ruby slots. Really interesting deck list here. Very well played. I've watched most of the top 8 and Ed go on to win this tournament. But again, huge shout out to him. If you're looking for Ruby Amethyst, I think this is a great place to start. I think it's really just Ed saying, hey, we're not defined. We have options, and it's okay if we're not just all in on 4 ofs. We don't need 4 Medusa, 0 Lady Tremaines. It's okay to go 2-2. We don't need 4 Sisu, 4 Be Prepared. Like, that's a world we don't have to live in because now we have other options. Dragonfire is basically the same as Ruby Sapphire playing 1 Let It Go with their Maui Sharks. That's all this card's doing. It's saying, you know what, at the end of the day, I can banish anything I want with the Dragonfire, and that's okay. I can afford to play 5 on average and do that. Maui Shark then later on goes, I don't really care what my opponent's doing. If they turn sideways, I'm going to have an answer for it. And then on top of that, I'm going to have a Dragonfire that answers most things also. Really interesting way to build this deck. Huge shout out to Ed for picking up another win in another Lorcana event. Now let's talk about something a little bit different. This was a top 4 of a 42-player event, which I saw this list, and the moment I saw it, I'm like, okay, this is making some choices here, and I want to showcase them because it is interesting. Just as like the Ruby Amethyst deck of the past, this list is also making some really interesting choices. First and foremost, the name of this deck on Inkdex was 2-drop or 2 cost Ursula is bait. And when you look at the list here, we don't have it. We are just saying like, nope, we don't need that card. Songs can't hurt me. I don't care that I'm Emerald deck. It doesn't matter. I'm going to play Honey Lemon. And Honey Lemon, for those that aren't sure, is a 2 cost 1/1 with 2 lore. It is inkable, and it has that kicker ability where you can pay 2 more and then make your opponent discard a card. Very versatile card, very interesting. 2 lore threat, also very interesting, having a little bit way to kind of establish some lore gains early on when necessary. We're going with 4 Calhouns in this list. That's also not what I would call very common for Emerald Steel these days. Maybe a 1 of or a 2 of, but it's really hard to get away with playing 4 of those. We're only playing 3 Let the Storm Rage on. I mean, that's insane to me. That card is so good that like I can't believe we cut down on that card, but we did. We tried it out. We're playing a Twin Fire again. This is, again, the one card that at the end of the day, I would love to know, like, hey, how do you feel about Twin Fire after playing with it in a tournament? It's one thing to test cards, and hey, sometimes we got to test cards in open formats and in tournaments, and I totally get those things too. But it's definitely the one card that I keep seeing coming up that I just wonder if at the end of a tournament, whether I was successful or not, I'm always always trying to make my deck better. I'm very curious if Twin Fire is the card that people are saying like, nope, I'm going to stick with that one, or yeah, no, that's the card I'm going to cut for sure. Mother Gothel, another interesting card here. Card that we thought was going to be pretty impactful in Shimmering Skies, and it just wasn't. So having this card now as another way to kind of bounce and remove things is definitely interesting to me. I wonder how often like that card got played, or if it was just ink most of the days, especially in a world where we're not playing any Ana in this list either. You know, a lot of our norms are not here. We don't have Ana. We don't have Ursula. Like, these are very normal cards that we've seen in this past. We have traded them in for cards like Calhoun, cards like Honey Lemon, cards like Mother Gothel. Like, there are definitely some shifts and changes here and decisions being made that in their metagame, maybe it is correct. I'm curious if a deck like this, or Emerald Seal decks in general, can kind of look at this and say, hey, Calhoun's a card that I want. I'm very curious if that's going to be a mainstay or not. I would love to know, in all honesty, like if there's anything I want to know in the comments. Are you out on Ursula too? Like, are we really not playing Ursula Deceiver anymore? I don't know that I can buy into that. I think that card's still very good. So like, I'd love to know in the comments. Let me know in the comments if you think you're out on Ursula Deceiver. I think that's the one takeaway from this list. I saw that 2-cost Ursula was bait, and it made me chuckle. It made me click on the deck immediately, and it made me feature it in the meta report this week. Oh, guys, let's talk about Alice. Oh, I love this list so much. So this was a top 32 deck in the Battle of the Bay. Obviously, didn't make top 8, didn't even make top 16, but it really was the first time I had seen Alice pop up in a breakdown in its competitive list. This is something that I'm playing something kind of close to this right now. It's not necessarily all the way in on Dwarven Mines. We've seen Dwarven Mines before on this channel. There was a Ruby Steel deck that had played it. There was Amber Steel decks that had played it and were successful. Now we're seeing it in Sapphire Steel, where we have the complements of Happy and Doc kind of utilizing that Mines a little bit. But at the end of this, for me, this is an Alice deck. Even if we take the Mines out and we just play Doc, we don't play Happy, we can play like any other 1-cost card. I think that this is like really what the type of deck that I would expect to be successful for Alice. I don't think we need crabs. I don't think we need dimes. I think that like this type of list is going to be very successful moving forward. And I really do believe that Alice is the key and the new function. Alice into Pluto, kind of insane. Alice with Beast, kind of insane. Alice with Cogsworth, really, really rough. Like, you're just presenting all of these lines that make it very difficult for them to answer the Alice, and all along why Alice is just like it's just like the funnel to all of it, to making all of these cards even better. In all honesty, Alice with John Silver is a bit scary. I won't lie. Giving my John Silver ward might make John Silver a pretty respectable card. So I really did want to give a quick shout out to this one, played by Jonathan Lee in the top 32. I think the deck is really cool. I think it's really interesting. I do think McDuck's Manor is a potentially playable card right now in this format. I love Alice. I love Baymax. I love Calhoun. I really do like a lot of what this deck is showcasing. Our last shout out here is a top 16, 140 player tournament. You got to look at this deck and wonder what is going on. It's another Alice deck. The first thing that I note was Alice in this deck again. Alice is so good, so phenomenal. But what made me a little bit scary at the concept was actually Alice into Yzma. I'm not a huge Yzma fan. Said it yesterday, on the video. I think it's a down for it. But if I get to Alice my Yzma, and it means that I'm always going to draw 3 cards, then yeah, I could see that. I think that's a pretty interesting play line. I can get behind those things. Elsa, Spirit of Winter, huge comeback for sure. Card was very good on our stream a couple weeks ago, and a couple of in the Blurple versus Red Blue matchup. I thought it was great. I thought it was really powerful. Now, if you tell me that I can play Elsa and then quest with Alice and make my Elsa also have ward, hey, that's pretty good, guys. Rafiki is definitely the other card here that very, very interesting inclusion for sure. That is a card that I don't know that I've seen be successful in Disney Lorcana. So anytime you see a new card, you got to go like, okay, like what is this card doing? It's a big boy. It's a big body. It's got 4 lore. Alice plus that is like almost a GG in some ways of like, hey, this is probably better than Lucky Dime because I just have more warded characters that my opponent can't deal with. I really think this is a very interesting. I wanted to give a shout out to the Sapphire Amethyst again. Again, this is a player that has definitely been successful in recent tournaments, playing Sapphire Amethyst and seeing what the developments were from Azurite C, and like seeing the cards like Alice come up, seeing Genie being good again, even in this version, Yzma getting a look at, Elsa making a return to the metagame, even Hades kind of making a return to the metagame in these decks as well. All very interesting. Floodborn Bell. A lot of really cool things going on with this deck. So there you have it. This week's meta report. Really a lot going on in Disney Lorcana. For off weeks, for no Disney Lorcana challenges, the idea there was like 2 140 player tournaments, a 110 player tournament, a 90 player tournament, a couple 40 player tournaments. There's a lot of Disney Lorcana played in the second week of Azurite C, and it's awesome to see that. It's awesome to see people going out and supporting these third-party tournaments, because right now, without Disney Lorcana challenges, these are the events that we need to support. So it's great to see players coming out and still wanting to play Lorcana, even though we're not playing in Ravensburger official events. I think that's great. I think it's important. Next week, 2 weeks from now, no, next week we have PAX Unplugged. It doesn't have any big scale events. It's actually a bunch of 3-round tournaments, which is a little upsetting, but it's kind of just is what it is. I think they're capped at 32 players, so it's going to be a bunch of 32 player three-round tournaments, which it's cool, but it's definitely not the same thing. They did all sell out, so you're going to have, I think, 2 or 3 events a day that were sold out, which is great for PAX Unplugged, but it's not the same. CCS is coming up in a couple weeks, and it's an 8K. I'm going to be going to CCS. I'm going to be supporting that third-party brand and trying to really go down there, have a fun time. It's going to be my first time going to one, but that's really what it's about right now, is that without Ravensburger official tournaments, we have Paris and we have NA Continentals, but that's it for a very long period of time. Azurite C set champs don't start until the middle of January. So we if you know of a local tournament in the area that's having a 1K or a 1.5K or even a 2K, things like that, go support your local game stores. Make them want to host those events so you have something to do in this dead time. If you're a community member of an LC, of an LCG, and you're like, hey, just go up, talk to your tournament organizer, talk to your judge, and say, hey, do you think that we could host one of these? Do you think the store would support it? I think that right now is a really good time to attack that and give Lorcana players a reason to play. With all that being said, shout out to Heavy Play, sponsor of the channel again today. If you're looking to up your game and kind of just really build a deck box for the future and just for the next period of time, I don't know how many times you guys go through and you buy a deck box and then within 3 months it's broken. You probably spent $20, $30, $40 on it, and you just opened it so many times it ripped, and you're like, great, I got to spend another $40 in deck box. Heavy Play is the answer to that. Their product is insane. Actually, I have a product review video coming up on the channel very soon for Heavy Play, but it's absolutely worth checking out. Link in the description there, TFM10 at checkout. Definitely check out Heavy Play. Thank you guys so much. Really interesting stuff going on. Really, the NA versus EU developments here and the different breakdowns of those were the most interesting things for me to see in this week's report. And there's a lot of other decks that are not covered in the meta report. And that's kind of what I'm here to tell you now. In December, we're going to be launching a full-on course, and it's going to be the ultimate meta report. Every week I do these, right? I do these weekly things where you get to kind of see what the developments are and what the breakdown is in Top Cups. But, there was 14 or 17 Amber Steel decks. What was different about those? I'm going to take the time, and on the Metafy, I'm going to be literally going through all those deck lists, showcasing the differences, showcasing what I think is better for the upcoming week and things like that. You're going to get a fully everything I can give to it in my honest professional opinion of Disney Lorcana is going to be in that guide. So definitely go and follow the Metafy, because that's when you're going to know that course is going to go live. You're going to be able to see it, and you're really just going to get an obscene amount of information. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Definitely hit the like video if you like content like this. If you're new to the channel, this is your first time here, we do these weekly. I break down the weekly meta of every single event that I can find and get the most information that really does help you kind of prepare for your upcoming tournaments. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.